Hi guys, Trevor Swenson with Through the Darkness. Welcome back. Today's topic is going to be triggered and trapped. My discussion about my story with PTSD, trauma and stressor-related disorder, and how triggers come into play on a daily basis or very regularly for me. What is a trigger? A trigger is anything that you have been conditioned to because of your trauma, because of your traumatic event, that automatically sets your body and your mind into the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode of existence. And if that is happening in situations that, if you were living a normal life, wouldn't have that type of response, it becomes incredibly intrusive to your quality of life every day. And for me, I can classify my type of triggers in 4 different categories. The triggers exist in these 4 categories, and that is psychological, emotional, physical, and professional triggers. Those are the 4 areas that I can find situations that immediately put me into a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, which makes the moments and the hours and sometimes days afterwards extremely difficult to get through in a normal sense of existence. As I look at triggers for myself and as I think of people with trauma and stressor-related disorder or PTSD that does not come from a one-time incredibly traumatic event, but comes over a period of time that is filled with multiple events that are toxic, that are manipulative, that are abusive. It comes down to a very specific set of characteristics in a very specific group or groups of people. And if you are in a terrible relationship that you develop trauma and stressor-related disorder over, or you had an abusive parent, or you had an abusive supervisor, or you had an abusive sibling or an abusive coworker, whatever it might be, as a rule of thumb, there usually is a sense of authority or power over you in either physicality or in position or title, to where they are able to trap you psychologically, emotionally, physically, professionally, and essentially enforce their will on your person time after time after time after time. And whether that comes through bullying or condescension or narcissistic patterns of abuse, or it comes down to physically manhandling you, if you will, it all revolves around figures that should be, or in most scenarios are, very well trusted, whether it be, like I said, a spouse, a significant other, a supervisor, somebody along those particular lines. And the end result is you develop triggers because your mind, your brain is injured. And the injury in myself is manifest because my brain stem, which is in charge of things like breathing and digestion and allowing me to survive, becomes activated during times that what used to be no activation whatsoever. And that becomes a problem for quality of life and living a what you would call a normal life, because you are living a big percentage of your time in a fight or flight, freeze, fawn mode, which becomes very, very unfortunate and very difficult to just make it through every day. So this is how the brain works, to try to explain it to you. The cognitive part of the brain, the big part of the brain, the cortex, does all of the thinking, does all of the calculating, does all of the memory work, the thought process, processes emotions, things along those lines that make humans absolutely amazing. Whereas the brain stem is responsible for all the basic things that you and I don't think about that take care of themselves: breathing, digestion, as I was speaking, and then overall survival instinct. And so if you picture a bear, I've talked about bears in previous videos. If a bear steps out onto a trail in front of you, if your cognitive, if your cortex, the cognitive part of your brain was in charge of the work, it would start calculating whether or not it's a big and fast bear, whether or not you are far enough away from safety, whether or not you are faster than the bear, all of these things that in the end are going to get you killed. That's what it comes down to. Valuable skills, valuable parts of the brain, obviously, and a very talented part of the brain, but your brain stem is the part that says, that's a threat, you need to run now. And everything gets amped up. Your breathing, your senses, the adrenaline, the muscle reaction, everything kicks into high gear. I need to preserve myself. And with trauma and stressor disorder and PTSD, that system is broken. My system is now broken. And so I get to now deal with triggers, which are reminders of the situation that I was in, that now constantly put me into that mode, which your body is not built to deal with continually. It's just like running a car engine wide open all the time. It can't sustain that type of performance. That's not what it was built for. And in my story, and in my case, everything just finally shut down, as I touched on an episode earlier on hitting that very bottom. And when you're triggered, obviously one of the things that you can use that is extremely unhealthy, but it's effective, is alcohol. And as I challenged in one of the last episodes, that is not the answer. The answer is learning how to manage the triggers and learning how to gradually expose yourself to those triggers to where they become more manageable. So what can a trigger be? A trigger can be a person. A trigger can be the mention of a person. The trigger can be a location. The trigger can be a sound. A trigger can be somebody else talking about a particular situation or person. A trigger can be an environment. A trigger can be a location. It really doesn't matter, because it's going to be individually tied to your unresolved trauma or your PTSD or your trauma and stressor-related disorder. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's a trigger that you and I are going to work very hard on overcoming, because it does, as I said before, really affect your overall quality of life for the worse. It's not fun being in that mode over nothing. The cognitive part of your brain cannot catch up with your brain stem, because your brain stem is equating those names, people, places, sounds, smells, scenarios with damage, very real injury, very real damage, very real psychological, emotional, physical, professional damage that took place. Your body wants to survive badly, but unfortunately it is recognizing things that should not be a threat as now a threat. So life becomes different. In fact, today I was with my daughter and we got in a situation that turned into a trigger for me. She didn't know it, but it turned into a trigger for me, and it all for me revolves around loss of control and being trapped. And that happened to us in a very innocent way today. And I immediately, it was a good thing that I had my dog with me, because my dog reacted exactly the way he should have reacted in that situation. And Murphy's a rock star. And it was a very manageable situation, but it was just a reminder of how long lasting the damage can be and how hard it is to work through. But we can work through those things. And one of the key things that I want you to think on is gradual exposure, which I'm working on myself. And whether it be plans that you have to implement, whether it be training a dog for your triggers like I am doing currently, whether it be making a plan to have goals to be able to do small steps over time like I am planning on doing as well. When it comes to the social end of the spectrum, that's a great goal to have as well. But the trigger part of PTSD is very, very real. And if you run into somebody that does have unresolved trauma, that does have trauma and stressor-related disorder, or does have PTSD, what I would ask you to do, if it was me, would be to very humbly ask and then listen. Because the fear and the pain and the suffering that we go through on a daily basis many times, which then rolls into multiple days as the trigger wears off, if you will, is a complete lack of understanding and lack of validation, because a lot of times these triggers are things that are absolutely not triggering to you. And I will tell you that does not make it any less triggering for those of us that have gone through it. Let me give you an example of that. If you grew up in a household where you had an abusive parent that was constantly talking in a condescending way towards you, belittling you, talking lack of self-worth over you for years on end, that will manifest itself, or has a chance of manifesting itself, to where when you run into people that are narcissistic, for instance, that have a tendency to act entitled, act smarter, act more important, act superior to your being, like I am worth more as a human being than you are, and project that on you, it could very easily be a trigger for you to bring you right back to your childhood experience. If that happened to you in a bad relationship and it happens accidentally in a very good relationship, it can be a trigger for you that needs to be dealt with. And that's the situation that I'm in currently, is that I'm out of the environment, I'm out of the war zone, if you will, but that doesn't unfortunately take away the triggers that I deal with. Is that sad? Yes, it's very sad. Has it affected my life? Yes, it has. Does it affect overall quality of life? Absolutely it does. But one of the best things that you can do is talk openly about what your triggers are to the people that are around you, especially the ones that ask. And I would ask that if you are one of the people that does ask about triggers and somebody that has PTSD, that you would just close your mouth and that you would listen, and that you would understand that what they are going through with those triggers probably is equivalent to the last time you were as scared as you've ever been. And they are quietly trying to manage that situation, usually without letting other people know the torment that they are going through. And so empathy and compassion and the ability to ask questions and then listen is very, very important in helping people to heal. I'm glad that we could talk about triggers. I'm glad we could talk about the reality of triggers. And I really hope that it opens your eyes and starts a discussion about what your triggers might be in unresolved trauma that you may have, especially with those people that love you, that are close to you, that do have your best interest in mind. It's very good just to be upfront. I've had to tell close friends, hey, just so you know, that's very much a trigger for me. And sometimes I get a sideways look, but I will tell you that the people that are close to me and love me absolutely give me the benefit of the doubt and are extremely loving and protective about what my triggers are. So I challenge you to understand both sides of the equation. The side that people with trauma and stressor disorder are on, PTSD are on, but also to understand aggressively how you can help the situation, because it's a very real part of struggling with PTSD. I hope you click and subscribe. We've got some interesting topics coming up. I hope you follow my story, my journey with PTSD, and I hope you find it encouraging that there is hope, that you do have a life to live, that your purpose hasn't changed, that when God looks at you, he still sees exactly this. Even though you don't feel like it when you're trapped and triggered, he looks at you as his perfect creation that still has all of the potential to walk out his perfect purpose for you here on this earth. And I hope you never forget that. I can't wait to see you next time. Again, Trevor Swenson for Through the Darkness. Take care.